Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Monday Q&A. So let's get to it. I've seen powerlifters rolling the bar towards them as they deadlift. I suppose as it's easier to move an object if it is already moving any input. Yeah, the inertia helps. An object in motion tends to stay in motion, although you are changing the direction of that motion. It can be beneficial. Potentially we could debate on the inertia, because you're having to use energy to change the direction. But in terms of a mental cueing and training yourself to pull back, I recommend that you always either do a bar roll on every rep, or you do a hip drop and pull back the way that you guys see me do it. Those are both very viable methods of doing it, and I would say for most people who cannot get the mental cues perfect without doing one of those two things, you need to do one of those two things. Some people are just naturally good deadlifters, or their technique is so good and so well honed that they don't have to do it, but they are the exception to the rule, not the norm. And I'm not saying there are some guys who do that, who do some impressive ass deadlifting, but they are rather exceptional, and they've really learned their technique. If you've been deadlifting heavy for less than 3 to 5 years, you absolutely need to be doing one of those two techniques. All right, next question. Hi Jason, what is your take on mobility for the average trainee before or after lifting static or dynamic things? Most athletes, I really like to see more of dynamic type stretching and mobility if possible. I don't recommend any static work before you train. If you're going to do anything before you train, it should be some sort of dynamic mobility work, which means you're not stretching something and holding it. You're staying in motion and hitting some sort of stretch reflex. But in general, an athlete should be doing mostly dynamic type stretching. I'm not saying static stretching doesn't have its place. I think static stretching is really more useful for recovery than anything else. And that for true mobility, more dynamic type stuff is probably better. Or at least weighted stretches of some type. But overall, heavier focus on dynamic. Dynamic should always be before training. If you're going to do static, do it after training. And remember, mobility is not universal. The amount of mobility that you need to have and flexibility that you need to have needs to be based upon your sport-specific or your fitness-specific goals. There is such a thing as having too much mobility for your sport, and it actually reducing certain performance elements in your training or increasing your risk of injury. So you can be too mobile, although in the non-competitive crowd, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to be. All right, next question. Would you and your wife ever move back to the U.S.? Right now, it's not an option due to some personal situations in my wife's life. She can't leave the U.K., which is one of the reasons why I'm here. I'm not saying I don't like the U.K., because I do like the U.K. I do like British culture. And no, British culture isn't just football and drinking. Although some would argue that it is. I do actually like the UK. I do like it here. If we were to move back to the US, I've always told her I want to move at some point later in life to Colorado, and I want to build a log cabin house. But that would be my ideal scenario if I were to move back to the United States. A log cabin house in Colorado, even though I'm from Texas. Alright guys, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 3.